Well, thanks for having me here. I'm really excited to be at TEDx, and my whole family is going to be really happy when this is over because I've just been freaking out at home about this whole thing. Well, it wasn't jumping out of an airplane that changed my perspective. It was actually forgetting to pull the ripcord that saved me. I had been wanting to jump out of an airplane for as long as I can remember, ever since I learned that any ordinary person can do it, as long as you have enough money or you know the right people or, like me, you just happen to be in the right place at the right time. I was so excited on the day of my jump that I said to my jump instructor, "I want to pull the ripcord." And he looked me up and down and he said, "Really?" And I looked him up and down and I said, "Yes, really." Well, when the jump actually happened, pulling the cord was the furthest thing from my mind. And I didn't even realize it until I was halfway home. Now, usually when I start telling this story to people who haven't heard it before, someone in the group starts to think in their head, "Okay, wait a minute now, just clarify this for me. You wanted to jump out of a perfectly safe airplane." And I wonder back, yes, why not? I wonder if I just play it safe too much, and if I try too hard to keep from jumping out of what I consider to be a perfectly safe airplane. And I wonder what I'm missing out on when I sit quietly with my seatbelt securely fastened around my waist. I hear people talk about being saved, and they say being saved will keep you safe, but sometimes I wonder if being safe is overrated. I wonder if I get so safe that I am too comfortable, or I am jaded, or I am numb to the things that matter most. So on the morning of my jump, I got up really early before the rest of my family, and my husband was the only other person who knew I was jumping because I just didn't want to worry people. And I got in the car, and we were living in Pennsylvania at this time, and I drove 90 minutes east toward the East Coast, and it was beautiful. It was a beautiful fall day, and took that 90 minutes, and I arrived at jump school. Well, jump school was more like a brief orientation or a short introduction to skydiving, and that was probably great because anything more than the 15 minutes it took me to learn to lift my chin and spread my arms and legs when I was in mid-flight probably would have been far too much information for me. So I remember receiving a harness, and I stepped into the harness, and somebody checked all of the connection points for me, and then somebody else handed me goggles, and I remember putting those on. And I also remember that someone gave me an altimeter, and I put that on my wrist, and it was like a giant watch, and it was more like a clock, and had numbers all around the face of it, and it had one hand, and it had zones. It had a yellow zone, and a gold zone, and a red zone. Red as in danger. And my jump instructor was explaining to me, he was saying, "Okay, I'm gonna pull the ripcord before it gets into this red zone." And that's when I got all big and bad. And I said, "Oh, no. I'm gonna pull the ripcord." And he said, "All right, you just need to remember that you need to pull that cord before the hand reaches the red zone." And I said, "No problem." And I waved him off. My jump instructor was cool. He was so cool. He was a true adrenaline junkie, and he lived for jumping out of airplanes. It was a perfect day. It was clear, not a cloud in the sky, completely blue sky, and it was fall, so the colors were just beautiful. There was no wind. It was just really, and he kept saying it over and over again, "It's a perfect day for a jump. It's a perfect day for a jump." So this guy was gonna jump no matter what. And if you told him you couldn't jump today, that would be like me saying to us, "We can't breathe today." You know, it's just not gonna happen. We are going to breathe. He was gonna jump. And it just so happened that on that day, he was inviting me along for the ride. So I don't know much about airplanes, but the airplane that came to pick us up and take us up and eventually out was really small, and it was like a propeller plane. And I remember that we got into the plane single file, and we just all waved at the camera, and then we ducked our head and got into the airplane. And I remember stepping across that threshold and realizing it was like I was walking into a different world, because I knew that the next time my feet touched the ground, I was going to be a different person, no matter what happened. So we went up in the air 2.5 miles, and it took us a little while to get up there. The plane, just couldn't go straight up. It circled around, and the mood in the airplane was really calm, very excited and light, and there wasn't a seatbelt in sight. And we were just all, in the plane together. When we got to our destination, that 2.5 miles up in the air, and there was just one group ahead of me, one team ahead of me, they started to make preparation to exit the plane. And the jump instructor stood up, and he opened up what looked like a giant garage door on the side of the airplane. And I remember thinking, that is a wide open space right there. And all I could see from sitting down on my spot on the airplane was just blue sky out there. And the guy who was jumping ahead of me, he was doing his very first ever solo jump. So he and his instructor stood in the doorway. They each had their own harness. They each had their own parachute. And the instructor held on to the waist of his student, and he said, 1, 2, 3, and they were gone. They just disappeared into the blue. And I could hear my instructor in my ear saying, okay, now what I want you to do, and by now we were, attached to each other with our harnesses, I want you to scoot toward the door. So I start scooting toward the door. And this is when I had my very first and only moment of hesitation. It was when I heard him in my ear say, okay, now what I want you to do is swing your legs out of the plane and wrap them around the body of the plane. And I thought, I've never heard that before when I was on an airplane. But I did it, swung my feet out over the airplane, and I wrapped my legs around the body of the plane, and the jump instructor in my ear said, 1, 2, and I think he said 3. And the next thing I knew, we were tumbling through the air, just somersaulting over ourselves and falling through the air, and eventually we leveled out. My belly was facing the ground, and my chin was up. My arms and legs were spread wide open, and we were just falling through the air. We fell for 60 seconds, and 60 seconds is a long time to fall through the air. It doesn't feel like falling, not like if you're thinking about a roller coaster or free fall adventure at the local amusement park. It feels more like if you were to stick your head up out of the sunroof on a backcountry road on a summer afternoon and you're going about 60 miles per hour times 10,000. So the skin on my face started to try to fold itself up around my ears, and my lips were plastered to my teeth, and I couldn't catch my breath, and the wind was just rushing into my face, and I felt like I was going to choke right there in the air, 14,000 feet above the earth. But in that moment, I just decided not to worry so much about breathing and just to enjoy the moment. Well, eventually, the canopy opened up above us, and it was just the two of us hanging there in the sky, and it was beautiful. It was quiet, so quiet that it hurt my ears. It was just beautiful, and the colors beneath us were glorious, and I could see for miles and miles and miles, and our landing was absolutely perfect. I don't have a picture of it, but it was perfect. 2 feet, no stumbles, no falling, and my jump instructor and I, we just high-fived and we celebrated, and we even did the bump a little bit there on the ground, and I kept saying, let's do it again, let's do it again. Well, eventually, I made my way back to my car, and I headed back east toward home, and I was so full of adrenaline and so excited about what had happened that day, I started to replay the day in my mind, and I thought about getting up early in the morning and driving to the jump school and stepping into the harness and getting my goggles, and the altimeter. And it was in that moment I realized I never saw the altimeter get to red. I never thought about it. I never paid attention to it. And even when you look at the video of the event, you can see my jump instructor, he pulls my hand in front of my face, he taps it, tapped me on my head, still nothing. Nothing, nothing, nothing. So in that moment on the highway, I had to pull the car over to the side of the road because I was having a moment. I was having the moment I should have had when I was falling out of that sky. And I was on the side of the road weeping and crying and saying, oh God, thank you for saving my life, oh my gosh. And I remembered in that moment that jump instructor never once said to me, you know, you almost killed us both. And he had every right to say that to me. Instead, what he did was high five, celebrate, and bump with me. And in that moment, while I was on the side of the road crying out to God for forgiveness, I realized maybe God is a lot like that jump instructor, an expert at what he does, a seeker of adventure in places I think are not safe, not a finger pointer, a person who remembers to pull the ripcord, and someone who invites me along for the ride. Thank you.